the gavel to Senator Huff, and I'm going to go over to the podium, quickly give some overviews, and walk members through the bill itself. We have presented a mock-up of SB 1 to all members of the committee. It's available to the public. So I can go through what the bill includes. We'll hear from witnesses, and then we'll have a general conversation here as a committee. I also want to point out that Senate session is called for 10 a.m., so we're going to most likely recess at 10 o'clock and then come back at a later point when there's a lull in the session. Usually there is at some point, to come back and continue where we left off. Having said that, is that okay with you, Senator Huff? All right.
Well, it's good to see everybody out here, all smilies and perky today, as we are.
Perky.
Perky, the operative word. The Race to the Top is an important program by President Obama. We want to make sure that we are qualified to not only access those funds, but be highly qualified. And so that is the intent of this bill. And so, Senator Romero, if you would go ahead and make your presentation, and we will work through it.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me begin by saying that this is a bipartisan effort. It's reflected in the fact that not only myself, but also as joint authors, Senator Huff, Senator Ahlquist, and Senator Wyland. I want to indicate that the Senate Education Committee has been holding a number of informational hearings. The most recent was in San Diego with Senator Wyland on September 16th. We're going to Orange County in mid-October, in Los Angeles early in November. And in Los Angeles, that will be a focus with turnaround schools, restructuring chronically low-performing schools. I think this is going to be a particularly interesting hearing, given that we will be holding this with Green Dot, Steve Barr, Marco Petrugio, really talking about the nuts and bolts of the turnaround of the chronically lowest performing schools in California and the challenges that we face. San Jose, Senator Ahlquist requested a hearing in her district, and we will be doing that on November 9th. We'll have the full schedule for everybody. We know that there was progress made during this last session. The governor did take steps to sign a number of bills that begin to make us eligible. But as we know with Race to the Top, there's eligibility and then there's competitive. And we need to make sure, I believe we should want to be sure, that we're not only eligible, that we are competitive in this sense. Today, with the witnesses that we have before us, we're going to hear from Rick Miller from the Department of Education, Kathy Gaither from the Office of the Secretary of Education, Jeannie Oropeza from the Department of Finance, and they're going to give us a status report on the state's progress in securing commitments from districts, teachers, unions, stakeholders, parents, as to their willingness to participate in the state's competitive plan. Let me go ahead and indicate as well as we go through this bill today, the purpose of today is really to whet the appetite, to start having you look at it. We want to walk through what the various sections say, what the intent is in moving this forward. We'd like to hear from members as we go forward, comments that you're receiving as to how we can be further competitive to go forward. Because as we know, this Race to the Top, it's not just about money. This is not about just $4 billion or $1 billion or $500 million. This really is about the future of the face of public education in California. We know the challenges. We know the statistics. And I think, and I'm excited in declaring this special session, having a strong bipartisan group, a lot of discussion and movement in California about the recognition that we cannot just talk about the achievement gap. We need to close that achievement gap. We need to stem those dropouts. We need to make sure that we really can, as we say, stand and deliver for the students of California. So that's the intent as we move forward. There's been a lot of discussion about when the deadline happens to be. Just most recently, and we've handed out the Ed Week article on the timing of applications and Duncan's comments, we are still hearing this fall. This fall could, of course, extend into the winter. But as we know, you usually, when you give an assignment, you don't wait until the last minute to do the work. This is part of the, it's a race, and we're in it, and I would say we're in it to win. So let's go ahead and get going on the actual bill. And everybody has a copy of the bill. I'm just going to walk through it, give you the summary, so as you start pouring through it, you can understand. Oh, I call it it's a bill autopsy. Doesn't mean the bill's going to die. We want to take a look at just what's the contents of the particular bill. So let's go ahead. If you turn to page 5 of the bill. This begins section 1, and there are 11 sections of the bill, and each of these begins to point for you to go back and study and review the various sections and what's contained in this bill. Section 1 removes the firewall, addresses the eligibility criteria. Senator Simitian authored, we all, I think, co-authored and passed that bill, Senate Bill 19. The governor signed it. It removes the eligibility, or rather, it makes us eligible at this point, but that's baseline. Okay, so that's what we've accomplished in SB 19. Essentially, Section 1 replicates what we did in SB 19. If you go into, on page 6, this bill has additional information about the firewall. Remember, with the firewall, we started out with a prohibition. SB 19 essentially moved us to silence. This bill and the language here is more of an affirmation, thou shalt use, as opposed to thou shalt not. So that's essentially the difference in Section 1. Let's go over to page 7, section 2. This, again, too, begins to deal with, it's dealing with data still, and it's similar to SB 19. It begins to meet some of the reform conditions dealing with pre-K student identifiers in the data system. Okay, going over to page 8, section 3. Once again, this is very similar to SB 19. This is addressing the sharing of data among segments and workforce data. This moves us more into the reform condition as opposed to mere eligibility. Page 9 moves us into section 4. Okay, this is where we begin to address competitiveness. Reform condition. Section 4 of the bill removes the charter school cap. President Obama, Secretary Duncan have asked for a lifting of caps on charter schools in the states. And to date, 7 states have lifted their caps on charters, and we've given you the delineation. This is a major emphasis by Duncan. President Obama has spoken about this. Section 4 of the bill removes the charter school cap. There has been some discussion about accountability with charters. Absolutely, we want, as Secretary Duncan says, this isn't just about talking about charters. It's about talking about quality, good charters, and I think we're favorable there. I'm certainly open to having a discussion about accountability, reforms. Let's figure out what works, and we can have that discussion as we go forward. Section 5 of the bill, which is on page 10, this is where we begin to move, I think, in a very strong direction. Senator Huff has introduced the measure. I have a joint author with him, open enrollment. And this begins to talk about what really, for me, is the major fight, I believe, in Race to the Top. And that is recognizing the chronically low-performing schools and to begin to provide options for parents and the students to not be trapped, but to have choice in public education, to be able to move via perhaps open enrollment for students who are in the lowest decile 1 to 3 schools. This begins to move us more with the reform condition to address chronically low-performing schools. That's Section 5 of the bill. And when we have the hearing with Green Dot in November and Steve Barr, this is going to be a major focus on looking at the turnarounds and options that are available. Section 6 of the bill begins on page 14. Once again, this is an issue that we've heard President Obama speak about consistently, as well as Secretary Duncan. their discussion about the requirement of having 5% of the lowest performing schools in the nation to be turnarounds. Both Obama and Duncan have reiterated this. I introduced Senate Bill 742 this last session. It's currently on the ropes in the Assembly, but I have hope. I'm never give up. But this is, we believe, begins to meet reform conditions that's put forth in Race to the Top, and it does begin to address the new SIG rules. I mean, make no doubt about it, when we're looking at Race to the Top, as we've indicated, it's not just about the money. This is about really where I believe the Obama administration is going over the next several years. So it behooves us, it's to our merit to be out front, to be a model, and to begin to tackle the chronically lowest performing schools and get ready now. So that essentially addresses the lowest performing schools in California. And this continues on page 15. You can go ahead and take a look at all of this. There's questions about charters. Some have asked, what about if it's a bad charter? Clearly on page 15, if you take a look starting at line 30, if it's a bad charter, that charter is revoked. You know, if that school is identified, it is revoked. This is about public schools and quality education for all students. So we want to emphasize that's on page 15. Section 7 of the bill, again, too, this moves us more in the reform condition. It's somewhat similar to SB 19. This requires CalPADS to have specified data elements and be integrated with other K through 16 data systems. This is something that I think we've all been striving for, to have not isolated silos of information, but to be able to link and to understand an academic pipeline in California. Page 18 of the bill continues. Here it begins to delineate some similarities with SB 19. Where there are differences with SB 19 begins on page 18. You can take a look at the sections A through F. Let's move forward to page 20, section 8. Again, too, we all know that in order to be eligible, we have to submit a plan. It has to be a state plan, a plan to be competitive. Section 8 of the bill essentially says the state shall develop a plan. And although the legislature ourselves, we are not going to write the plan, we certainly are going to be there participating as partners with the administration and the secretary and the Office of Education in envisioning what this plan should be. So this section enables us to submit the plan. Moving forth to page 23, section 9 of the bill. It finally, again, too, this is sort of like the legalese, the fine print. It basically says that the plan should reflect final Race to the Top rules. Section 10 is declarative on mandates, and Section 11 says this is urgency. And it's urgency for a reason. This is, as I've said, it's not a stroll to the top, it's a race to the top. The rest of the nation is moving. They've heard the call. They've seen the challenges before us, and I know that in California we will as well. So that's essentially the bill. I would urge you take a look at it. We want to start incorporating ideas. The Pro Tem and myself have had a very, I think, good conversation about also ways to incorporate ideas on career partnership, career technical education. I think in the writing of the plan, this is again too part of where we can look in converting chronically low-performing schools and the value and the rigor and the relevance that these partnership academies can face. Others are interested in focusing on English language learners, and there will be other measures introduced in the Assembly. I believe Assemblyman Cotto is introducing a bill. I certainly have a long-standing interest on English language learners, but when we look at this as well, too, and I've spoken with the administration, my hope is that we can incorporate this and we look at the turnaround schools and meeting the needs of all of our students. So I think there's much to do, but the challenge is let's just do it. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to our witnesses who are here, and I'm going to go back and sit at the dais so we can have a general conversation. But please look at the bill, ask questions, give us your input, give us your thoughts, talk to your LEAs about what they're hearing, what they are wanting to see. Kids have one shot at an education, And this is our opportunity to stand with those kids and say, we want you to have the best shot possible. And the only way we can do that is if we become eligible, baseline, but above that, if we become competitive, not only for this competition, but for all generations of students that will follow afterwards. So thank you, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Rick Miller with the California Department of Education, and I'm going to start, but I'm working in very closely with the Governor's Office and the State Board of Education in trying to design a beginning of a plan for the state of California. So my colleagues have allowed me to speak first, but we're going to sort of do this together. The way we're thinking about Race for the Top currently is, as you know, there's 4 assurance areas that you have to do, but then the application sort of says, and then there's another area that you really want to focus on. You may, as a state, focus deeply into one of the 4 assurance areas, or you may find another area that you think is important to you, and this is really where, as a competition, each state differentiates themselves. In our thinking about this, what seems to be making the most sense to us as we continue to look at it is really thinking about low-performing schools as the area of engagement for the state of California. That if you think about the 4 assurance areas in terms of teacher effectiveness, use of good information, you'll find all that in how you turn around a low-performing school. So it gives us a good way to look at the program, at what we want to do. So we're really trying to focus in on that area, and we also are going at it with the theory that we want to try to bring as many LEAs and many people into this process as possible. So what we know from the application is that, as the Senator Romero said, the 5% of the lowest 5% of the persistent low-performing schools would have to be in this program, and so we're going to have to put together a program to how to deal with those schools. But in addition, we actually want to encourage other LEAs to join this process and voluntarily enter and be part of the Race for the Top application. So we want to talk about that a little bit as well. On the mandatory side, I do want to start with one thing that we're absolutely adamant about, and we feel very strongly based on our previous experience that you've all been a part of, is that whenever we figure out how to identify which schools are in the lowest 5%, when we figure that out, what that would trigger would be the LEA itself would then enter into this partnership with us. We do not believe the right way for this to happen is for the state to intervene directly into the school, bypassing the LEA. We've tried that. We think it is not an effective way to work with schools. So we would like to see if you trigger this thing, then your LEA comes in and must bring you as a school in. However, we'd also like to say you could bring other schools in your district as well. On the voluntary side, we're doing a lot of thinking about why you'd want to be part of this, what we can offer you. And we think what the administration is clearly asking us to do is to think very creatively and innovatively about what can happen, to put all the data we have in front of us into how to turn around low-performing schools. And so we're trying to really do a lot of outreach to the field and understand from their perspective what great superintendents, principals, and teachers around the state say will work to turn around low-performing schools. And then to the extent that the state is a barrier, that local rules are a barrier, we want to try to remove those barriers so that they have the ability to get in and perform these functions. So that is sort of the broad outreach of how we're looking at it currently. And also I wanted to ask our Undersecretary, Kathy Gaither, to say a little more about the process.
Thank you. Catherine Gaither, Governor's Office of Education. I think the governor believes that this is the most important thing that California needs to do right now in the way of education. We've had in California a long history of being first in the country, first to adopt very high rigorous standards, first to adopt standard line assessments, first to really take a crack at trying to improve education in California. And for many years, we have been pretty much near the top of the country in terms of our academic rigor. The race to the top is an opportunity for California to continue to be at the top and not fall behind the rest of the nation. And what's critical is that we not rest on our laurels of the past 20 years, but that we actually move forward and take what we have learned and what other states have learned about how to turn around these schools that, despite all of our best efforts, despite all of the reforms that the legislature and 3 governors in the past years that I've been working on education have worked together to help schools, it hasn't helped every school. There are some schools still at the bottom that just have not been reached by the changes that we have attempted, and we need to do more for those schools, and that's what Race to the Top is about. The focus is on those bottom 5%, the schools that have just not been able to get over that hurdle, just not been able to get themselves turned around. And that is really why we need the reforms, why we need these changes. Whatever barriers we have, we need to bring them down. We need to give schools the flexibility to do what they know works in those schools. And our hope is that our partnership with the LEAs that come forward in the next 2 months, because we have a very short window to do this application, those schools that are ready right now and can reach an agreement with their local bargaining unit and their local governing board can join with the state in creating the state's plan. What's important to recognize is that this is not the state developing a plan. This is the state and the LEAs and the legislature and all of the stakeholders developing California's plan. So it's not a plan that's being developed by the Department of Education or the governor or the legislature. It's being developed by all of California, and that's the only way that we can win the competition. We must address every area in Race to the Top. There are 19 criteria. So I know a lot of the press coverage in the past couple of days has basically said, well, SB 19 was signed, and SB 19 was a great accomplishment to get that bill signed. However, it doesn't go far enough to make us truly competitive. We know that other states already have their applications completed, and other states are already addressing all 19 areas plus more. So for California to actually get some of this money that we know that we need to help these districts, and remember, we're not talking about districts that aren't already working with these low-performing schools. We're talking about district superintendents who are already making these efforts, who are already working in good relationship with their local bargaining unit, and this would give them some money to help them continue that work. So rather than trying to continue that work, given the current fiscal situation and no extra money, this is a way for them to continue and then share their expertise and their results with the rest of the state. And that is really the grand plan, not only from Washington, D.C., but for California, is for those districts that are ready to begin the work and then share the results. The governor signed several pieces of legislation that move us forward. SB 19 was one of them. He also signed AB 1130, which will move California to a growth assessment model. This is important because all of Race to the Top, school improvement grants, we think the reauthorization of Title I, everything coming down from the federal government is going to be about data-driven reform. And we know that our current assessment is a static assessment. It doesn't measure progress of individual students. And so in these very lowest performing schools, it's so critical for us to understand which students are moving forward, which schools are doing the right job. If they're moving forward, we need to replicate what they're doing. But only a growth assessment model can help us with that. And that is something that we think will help all of the schools, in particular those schools that will be part of Race to the Top. Our goal is to meet with superintendents who are interested and ready, as well as stakeholders. Our intent is to have a website that will be up soon, hopefully, to allow the public to actually make comment and to allow the public to give us input. One of the great things about everything related to the ARA bill is the transparency and the ability for the public to interact and to understand what not only the federal government is doing, but what state and local governments are doing. We want to do this with Race to the Top as well. So we plan to have meetings across the state.
Can I just interject for a moment? A Republican caucus has just been called before session, and we're hopeful it'll be positive and we can move quickly in session. So I just want to take a timeout right now because Senator Wyland is requesting to make a few comments, and then we'll come back and continue. Senator Wyland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry we can't continue here, but I did want to just make a couple of brief comments. I want to thank the chair for her work on this bill, our vice chair and Senator Alquist. All of us are committed, and this is the way this ought to be. This is absolutely a non-partisan issue. It is crucial. It focuses on, as we've discussed, on the lowest performing schools. We have lots of work to do on other schools as well, but if we don't get those right, the implications for the state are grave. And, you know, you hear this and it begins to sound like a platitude, but the reality is, with this bubble, this demographic bubble at one end, and at the other end, folks who are retiring and leaving the state, we need to educate capable, productive citizens. And this bill, as has been discussed, gives us the ability to do that. I have been struck ever since I've been here, Madam Chair, you talked about English language learners, which is crucial that we figure out how to do a good job at that. It's literally crucial to the future of this state. And although most of them are native Spanish speakers, we have dozens of languages. In Orange County, and I certainly know in Los Angeles, you can have classes with 4 or 5 different languages. We do not have, we tried 3 or 4 years ago to determine if there were a standard accepted pedagogy, a standard accepted pedagogical approach to accomplishing this, and there doesn't seem to be one. And of course, there are 6 or 7 different situations. There's ones that take care of themselves. You know, you're a first grader, there's 10 first graders in a class of 30 and the other 20 speak English. Mostly that takes care of itself when they're young like that. But in my own district, we think this is just in urban areas. Where I was on the school board, we have a majority Spanish speaking in the school system. All the way across from Escondido to San Marcos to Vista, all the way across that northern tier. And we don't have a standard way of doing that. This, and this is the positive side of this, where it's not just somehow by comparing data of performance in school with the teacher. It's not just punitive. Its real promise, I think, is that it actually assists us. We're going to find those teachers, and they're out there, who are really skilled at doing this. And that's how we're going to identify, I think, best practices. So anyway, we could talk a long time about this. I appreciate so much the work on this. And hopefully this is a great bill, and it will sail through and not suffer the fate of some of my great bills.
And Senator Wyland, Senator Hollingsworth must have been so compelled by your words that we just got notice that Republican caucus is postponed till 10 o'clock.
Wonderful.
All right.
You mean I'll have another chance?
We're just sort of going with the
you.
flow. All right. So having said that, let's return. Continue, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Continuing with our public outreach plan. So we hope to have the website up and running. We also plan regional meetings. We certainly have appreciated the meetings that you have scheduled across the state, as well as the Assembly, and we know that that also is an important and critical part of the public input for California's Race to the Top plan. It's important that we have input as well as buy-in from all of the important stakeholders in California. It's part of the requirements of the application. And so we hope to continue that. We hope that we can get information from you and from your staff, and we welcome you at any of our meetings that we're having. We're not intending to do anything in private. Everything, as I said, is planned to be transparent and as open as possible, because we know that this is not a plan that can be put together by one person or 5 people. It is the state's plan, and it needs to be one of the best in the country for us to succeed. And I think that's the governor's goal. I think it's the superintendent's goal, and I know that it's your goal in helping us with this bill. And we can't express more urgently how critical this bill is and how critical it is that California succeed in the competition nationally.
Thank you. Ms. Oropeza.
Jane Oropeza, Department of Finance. I'm very happy that Mr. Wyland made the comments that he made. I didn't participate in the Senate hearing. I'm sorry, in the Assembly hearing a couple weeks ago. I was a bit concerned that the entire focus was simply about the adults, simply about what happens to teachers, simply about the administrators, and very little focus on the students. And I think this is what this is about. Whether we receive $1 or not from Race to the Top, we need to change the system. We need to look at what's happening in the schools. We need to make sure that the kids are not falling through the cracks. whether it be college or careers or whatever it is that they need to succeed at, that's how California continues to be viable. And without that, we cannot succeed. And that's why this bill is very important. While we'll have the data will not do us any good if the teachers do not know how to use that data, if they do not know how to put it into practice and then turn it around to teach students. And so it's critical that we look at allowing students to transfer from one school to another if they're not being served at those schools. And I would note that the administration, the governor doesn't believe that every teacher needs to be replaced. We think there are many, many, many good teachers, and they can be better if we can just give them the tools that they need to succeed, just like the students. And so we're hopeful that we can all work together in a bipartisan manner and with the superintendent. And you rarely see us all on the same page, but we're all here on the same page because this is critical in our history of education, because we've never seen something that truly focuses on individual students and tracking those students as they progress through school. And I think that's the most critical part that we all need to continue to focus on. And we'll hear a lot about things in terms of how this is going to be harmful to teachers and administrators, but I think it can work for them. And I think this is our opportunity to see how we can make that work. And without your input, without us, challenging ourselves to change the way we do things and focus on the kids, we're never going to succeed as a state in terms of educating students and being competitive in the world economy.
Let me go to the LAO and just ask if you have any comments at this point.
Jennifer Kuhn from the Ledge Analyst, and I know we've talked before, so I was just going to make 3 comments that I don't think have been highlighted before, and that I hope speaks to what I think was one of your objectives today, in really sifting through and identifying the highest priorities and going through parts of the bill to really make it as strong as possible. So my first comment is on this topic of low-performing schools. Even outside of Race to the Top, the state has some $600 million in federal school improvement funding and Title I funding available for these schools. And a requirement to draw down that money and use it in the state, already money available to California, is to have this kind of program in place. And this is even holding up 2009-10 money that's already in the budget package that you've adopted. Before the state can leverage it, pull it down, use it, this kind of program needs to be in place. As once this kind of program is put in place, it also frees up any money that's not spent for this program. You have some options for using it for other reform endeavors. So just one comment regarding that is a sense of urgency because it's connected to dollars already before you, as well as dollars that will appear in 2010-11. The second issue is regarding data. Even in addition to the Race to the Top money, there are state and local grants, both federally funded for districts to be making and the state to be making improvements in these areas. You can connect that to Race to the Top. So, for example, a grant that is funded through the Department of Ed from the Institute of Education Sciences to make enhancements to CalPADS. The state already is in the process of going through that endeavor, as well as leveraging what's called Enhancing Education Through Technology grants. These are grants that you have not yet sort of formally authorized, but that's available to California. So as you go through this Race to the Top process, you can be integrating it with those other endeavors to make sure that all the data efforts are working in concert. And lastly, as you go through this process, one very important component will be building your budget plan. How much does it cost to have a program for low-performing schools? How much do certain data and endeavors cost so that you can give that budget plan to the federal government and they'll know whether you're asking for $500 or $1 billion. So as you, again, sift through these types of programs and the components that you want to authorize, it's also being very thoughtful to think about the fiscal impact of doing those things.
Thank you very much. I think that was very instructive, very informative, because essentially what we're looking at, this is the beginning of the future. And we have an opportunity to come in with the blueprint, nominally called Race to the Top, but it really is about this is the future of how we will deliver public education in the nation with a particular focus on the turnaround of the lowest performing schools. Ms. Kuhn, you talked about the cost, and I think it's important for us not only to look at the cost in our education budget, but in looking at our incarceration budget as well. I think we all saw the recent report that indicated the cost of incarcerating juveniles in the state of California, the juvenile justice system, due to dropouts. We're looking at $1 billion a year, and these are for juveniles, not to mention the adult system. So it is about money, but it really is even more so about opportunity and the American dream that really only education provides. So thank you so much for that presentation. Let me ask, and at this point, let's open it up to questions and comments. Let me just start with, first just ask a couple of questions of Ms. Oropeza. It's a plan that will be submitted through the state in partnership with local education agencies. There is no plan if there is not local participation. And so I think, Kathy, thank you so much because you really clarified that point. This is not a top-down. This really is from the locals saying, this is what we envision we can do and want to do. And there's been some exciting discussion taking place in districts throughout California. We heard those conversations in San Diego. We've heard them in Los Angeles. I mean, we're seeing them as we go forward. Let me ask if you can begin to identify, and you don't have to name names, but if you can begin to identify for us what is being done right now. How is this working group working to outreach with various districts and superintendents saying, hey, we'd like to try X, Y, and Z, or we'd like to do this? What are you hearing that brings us to the table saying they are ready to go and we've got a list going forward?
I'll defer to Rick Miller. He's been taking the lead in terms of contacting districts and setting up the meetings and
Thanks. So as we mentioned, we're going to do a large-scale reach out. We're going to do webinars. We're going to join you in your hearings. So we're going to get the state. We want to touch every area, anyone that wants to have input. In the meantime, there are certain structures already exist in the state where superintendents come together and have conversations. There's a district collaborative that meets regularly with, frankly, a lot of reform-minded superintendents. So we've been talking to them with some regularity, trying to get their input on what they think. And so districts like Long Beach and Garden Grove and Fresno Unified has been leading this. San Jose and San Francisco, sort of giving us some real good guidance on what they think is realistic and what they think, where they think they are and how they could get where they want to go and what we can do to help them.
Are there any provisions in SB 1 that you have met resistance from some of the superintendents who are saying, we're interested, we're having discussions with our collective bargaining units, we're having discussions with families and parents about the opportunities, especially on the lowest performing schools?
I don't think there's wide agreement among the superintendents, and I don't think it's about SB 1. I think it's about the federal guidance and sort of what they've said. And I think there is some disagreement over alternative compensation in terms of how important that is to critically turning around a school and having some flexibilities in terms of how whether you use information to assess the effectiveness of a teacher or a program. And these may seem subtle, but they're important distinctions that different superintendents have different takes on. So we're trying to sort of work through that and understand that better so we can get to a place that makes sense for everybody. I mean, what we really also want to be very cautious of, we're convinced, is there's no single solution. There's no, this is what you need to do. So trying to make an umbrella that makes sure we're all racing, we're all doing some real important work, but that we're doing it in a way that allows local flexibility.
All right. Let me stop there and open it up for other members of the committee to ask questions of any of our witnesses or on, again, this is not a debate on SB 1 today, but we want to make sure that everybody has this. And for those of you who came in a little bit late, and I just want to stop for a moment and say, look, this is great to see so many members of the Education Committee. This is an informational hearing. I don't think we've ever gotten this degree of participation in an informational hearing. So I think I just want to give kudos to everybody. Senator Simitian.
As is often the case, we've got a little bit of a chicken and egg problem here, which is we all want to hurry up on the application, but we can't really hurry up on the application until we know what the application criteria are, and the application criteria are not forthcoming in final form at this point. What is the best estimate of folks here as to when we will see final language in terms of the criteria, because I understand the U.S. Department of Education is currently commenting and reviewing the early applications on the draft. So part of our timeline and our work plan is a function of, so when do they give us the final word on what the criteria might be?
Well, the administration has said continuously, and all they will say is late fall. So we've been spending time with our Farmers Almanac to try to understand what they mean by that. But we think we're hopeful that mid to late November is what we hope. I think that according to the Almanac, they could go into late December, December 21st. I think is the solstice. So we could see it that way. But I'm hopeful late November, early December.
Let me follow up then. Some of you will know I was in Washington on other business and spent some time at the Department of Education. Asked their staff. The late fall definition I got was sometime between November 1st and November 30th. And if I had to intuit what I heard, the intuition I brought to the conversation was that mid-November was a target. So that's sort of, now, let's assume that that's the case. It may not be, but let's assume that that's the case. Do I understand correctly then that we have 60 days after that to get our application in? All right. So could someone, maybe it's someone at the table or maybe it's our chair, lay out then, if we were to get the final word by, say, mid-November, what kind of a timeline does that suggest in terms of being an applicant in the first round? What can we do even before we have final guidelines? And what do we frankly have to wait until we know what the rules of the game are before we can package an application?
I think that's a really good question. And I think let me first start by saying that however the guidelines are changed and however the final criteria are written, we need to remember that this is a competition, and so we don't want to just have a set of frameworks in place or an application that meets the minimum criteria. We need to exceed the minimum criteria if we are going to successfully compete with the rest of the country. So we think we need to start now, which is why we haven't waited for the guidelines. We know that whether the guidelines are tweaked in either major or minor ways, there are enough signals from Secretary Duncan through all of his speeches and through his recent beginning work on the ESEA reauthorization that there are not going to be major changes. The focus will be on the lowest performing schools. The focus will be on turning around schools, and it will be on having high quality charters. It will be on giving parents the ability to move their kids out of those schools if they're low performing. It will be including data as reform, teacher evaluation, principal evaluation. All of that needs to be put into those plans, which is why we can't wait for the guidelines. To have the LEAs work together with their unions and their governing board, they need to start those discussions now as well. And so we are working on the history part of the application. We are working on the outreach, as we've talked about. And we're working with the LEAs to identify what other things they need. Are there other barriers that we need to remove that are in state law so that they can actually do a really great and bold and innovative turnaround plan? Because whatever happens with the guidelines, that is going to be the central core of our application and the central core of how Secretary Duncan and his staff will be reviewing California's application. What are we bringing to the table in terms of innovative, bold, creative ways to turn around these very bottom schools? And we don't need to wait for the guidelines to be able to do that.
Are there areas where you think we may not have as much guidance as we need to get started now? Are there areas where there are any big question marks? Or do you feel like this tweaking, essentially, of what you've already seen is likely to run across the spectrum?
Actually, I tend to think it would go the other way in the sense that my conversations with the department, when I've been back in D.C., what they've said is, Joanne Weiss, who's heading it up for the secretary, has said that she actually was struck by how compliance-oriented the response to that application was, and that was not what they intended. And they really want to list out all the things you have to do and be more ask for creativity from the state. So I think what they want to go is the other direction, to sort of say, as Kathy said, you show us how you can turn on the low-performing schools, and if you put together a good plan, we're going to look at that regardless of what else goes in the application. And that's why there's tons of work to do right now, because we know there are people, I mean, with all due respect, I think we'd agree the people who know how to turn around low-performing schools aren't in this room. They're in thousands of classrooms right now doing the work, so we need to get out and talk to them and find out what works. And what we often find is they'll say, hey, I could do this in a day, but here are the 5 reasons that current structure doesn't allow me. The beauty of SB1, the beauty of Race to the Top is it allows us to say, forget that. Let's get rid of those structures. Let's get rid of what's not working, and you can really tell us what works, and we're going to give you the opportunity to do it.
And then finally, if I may, that lays out sort of just a process question for the chair and the committee and the legislature and the folks at the table, which is, so if it were November 15th for the sake of discussion, then that means January 15th or thereabouts is the application deadline. How does that play out in terms of legislative action by the California State Legislature, which presumably will be necessary for some of this, to qualify?
It doesn't bode well for our vacation.
When are we doing what? Well, no, I mean, when are we doing what? Is this the kind of thing where we can come back the first week in January and have it all teed up? Is it the kind of thing where we're going to have to come back on some additional special session days after November 15th, but before January 15th?
Another excellent question. Thank you. We believe, all of us, I think, that we must have legislation very soon, certainly not in January, and it should be well on its way to completion in November, and if there needed to be any minor tweaks once those guidelines came out, it would really just need to be minor. We really can't complete the application until we know what the state statutory structure is. So while we can do a lot of the history and we can work with the LEAs and we can gather up what their plans are for their own low-performing schools and whatever else we're going to do in terms of working with higher ed or working with other areas of the education community to bring in other innovative ways to improve education in California, we can't complete that application and complete all of the criteria without knowing what California's state-level policy is. So, yes, we need action, hopefully, before Thanksgiving.
Senator Simitian, in fact, Senator Steinberg and I were having conversations about this yesterday and this morning via email, and this was precisely trying to delineate a time frame for the Senate to work. And we do have, of course, some time constraints. I had laid out, look, we've got through the remainder of October. We probably have through about mid-November. We've got Thanksgiving to accommodate. We've got probably a good 3 weeks in December, but it clock's over, it ends. And I just want to reiterate as well, to me, this is not about if California competes in the first round. This is about California must competing in the first round. Our time is really limited. So I think the sooner that we move we can move quickly. We can move, of course, deliberately and very thoughtfully, because these are longstanding issues that we've all been wrestling with for quite some time. So to some extent, the issue right now is not just these are brand new issues. They really are. These are the issues that we've all seen. The question right now is, are we finally ready to say we need to do it at this point? And one other issue as well on the time frame is that we can start working with the LEAs and looking at all that's going on, but we need to send the signal from Sacramento that we've got the spine and we are going to be there to say we encourage you to do this at your local level.
Madam Chair, if I could, I want to refine something you said, and then I want to offer a crass commercial announcement as well. The refinement goes to these issues have been before us. They're not new. I agree with that. But, you know, I think you could equally say that the issue of class size reduction had been before the state for a long time, before action was finally taken in the Wilson administration. But because it was hurried, class size reduction was not implemented in a successful way, certainly not in the initial years. And there were real impacts because while the issue had been around for a long time, it got hustled through in a way. Similarly, open enrollment issues, which are here, and where I have quite a bit of sympathy to those who talk about public school choice for parents. Open enrollment conversations have been around for a long time. But if we hustle that one through and don't do a good job and don't have the same kind of due diligence we should on any other piece of legislation, we'll end up with 1,000 K-12 school districts who are struggling to manage what might be a very good policy notion, but something that doesn't simply work from a sort of a practical day-to-day. And we don't want to take the good idea of open enrollment and give it a bad reputation by overlooking what are going to be significant implementation challenges moving forward. That's my refinement. Then just the brief commercial announcement, if I may. There continue to be some issues on data that, as you know, I'd like to work with. That's why the second bill here is mine. These largely are issues of data access, stakeholder access to the data. This is also part of the race to the top, not as highly visible, as some of these other issues. But consistent with the work that I've been doing in data, we'll work along there. My understanding from the LAO's office is that right now we do not have a plan in place as race to the top would require that would meet the data access requirements. So we can sort that out in the next couple of months as well.
Any other members? Senator Wyland?
Just quickly regarding the data, and Senator Simitian and I have discussed this. I'm a believer in the data we collect, making it as open to as many people as possible. But if we get this to be reality, it will be a wonderful thing. One of the challenges, though, is to use that data, and that's going to take some pretty dramatic stuff, too. Because we may determine that, for example, that we have to alter teacher training because certain teachers who've been trained in a certain way, perhaps at a certain school, perhaps with certain courses, are more effective. What if it turns out that at the primary school level, to go back to English language learners, that we find that teachers who've come here from Arizona who have majored in education, which we frown upon, I don't even think we allow it, but who spent a lot of time in classrooms and have learned a multitude of approaches with different classes about how to make sure these students learn English. We might find that out, and then to use that data and make the changes, there's going to be plenty of challenges ahead, but we need to do it.
Great. Senator Hancock.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Romero. I'm just very heartened at the level of creativity and specificity that you all seem to be putting in this. I know that when I served with Mr. Miller in the U.S. Department of Education in the previous several administrations ago now, it was amazing when we had Goals 2000, the level of creative energy that was catalyzed by the fact that there was a little bit of federal money out there. And in relative terms, that's kind of what this is. It's a small amount of federal money, but it could allow a lot of very, very interesting and helpful focusing of our attention and catalyzing what have been a kind of disparate set of efforts over the years. I'm glad you're looking, or we think that the feds are looking at making things more permissive instead of prescriptive. I think that's going to be important. Just to note what I'm hearing, from my districts, there's a lot of parental concern about over-testing, about young teachers leaving the profession because they feel deprofessionalized, and that a profession that's highly demanding of creativity and technique, really. And I believe a lot of it is art, synergy of personal character and enthusiasm for kids, that they will be discouraged from going to low-performing schools if they feel they will be evaluated in a punitive kind of way if those students do not perform at the level of wealthy students in different districts. So I'm assuming and hoping that when we write our plans, there are going to be an acknowledgement of that written in, that when we talk about low-performing schools, I believe we, without exception, are talking about schools in high-poverty areas, where students are going to need many things in addition to good teachers in classrooms: medical checkups, vision checkups, dental care, breakfast, to name a few, and also generally lifting lifting parents out of poverty. So I hope that we'll be looking at those things, and that I believe there was a section in the application, at least as I was reading about it in EdSource, that says what financial commitment the state is going to make, and will that commitment continue after Race to the Top funds are used. Am I correct in that? And do we have any plans to look at how we're going to continue funding these efforts?
There are certain maintenance of effort requirements, and those were tied to applying for the state fiscal stabilization funds, but they also carry over to the Race to the Top application as well. So we have to keep in mind that we are going to be applying for two different pots of money, not just the Race to the Top, but we still have to apply for the second portion of the state fiscal stabilization funding. And some of the requirements, some of the things that we have, including the firewall, among others, are required just to draw down that last piece of money to get California their share of the $40+ billion that were available to states. So.
And then in terms of health and nutrition, it's a great point. But what we really, as Kathy said, we really wanted this to be bottom up. And so what we're going to be doing is we're looking for districts. And what the Race for the Top is about is, at least in the first round of applications, for those district and schools who have begun this process.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would be anxious to hear from the LEAs who have put together local health collaboratives and nutrition collaboratives and ensuring they're feeding our children. And as a result, are showing progress. And that's who we want to bring in, and we want to use that as an example. So we're going to be looking definitely for that. And then finally, on the assessment thing, I do want to point out that the Obama administration has put aside $350 million to have a national conversation about our current assessment structure and to look at multiple measures as a way to understand students' assessment.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting and exciting, actually. And do you know, Mr. Miller, if the department, and I guess this goes to the legislature too, we pride ourselves on having the third highest standards in the country or whatever. If national core standards are developed, it would be immensely helpful in actually getting a realistic assessment of how students are doing in different states. Is California ready to be part of that discussion, even if it means revising our own standards so that we're testing to the standards that everyone is using?
California is participating in the national effort to help develop the core standards. I think you're probably aware that all that has been released so far are the exit standards, so they don't have grade level standards yet. We're in the process of seeing how they compare to California, and we're eagerly awaiting the international benchmarking that will come out of that effort. But I think what's important to recognize is that Secretary Duncan has committed to our governor and our superintendent and everyone else who has talked to him from California that California will not be required to reduce its standards. So we are a long ways away from seeing where we are in relation to those core standards. And I think the governor has very strongly indicated, that was his one comment on Race to the Top, was that we did not want to risk being in a situation where we were required to actually lower our academic standards.
Okay, yeah, I would just point out again, NAEP may not be the test that we want to use, but if we can't tell how students in California are doing versus students in Texas or Michigan or Minnesota, we're not really getting a realistic assessment of how we're doing. So I look forward to those national core standards.
Okay. Senator Alquist, and then Senator Liu.
Thank you very much. I want to commend the chair for her leadership in this area, and I want to also commend the governor and superintendent of education. I mean, it's really going to be a joint effort to get where we need to go. As was mentioned earlier, it's really a matter of will. We really understand the issues. I mean, the issues are basically the same when I got involved in education in the late 60s. They really haven't changed. We have to be thorough and look at the whole issue when we decide how to do this, but we know what we are dealing with. I wanted to mention that I carried legislation back when I was in the Assembly that got on the then governor's desk that would have created an individual learning plan for all students. And I got the idea from when I was on a school board many years ago, and there were plans for students in special education. I think the time may be right for me to bring this back. I think it's very complementary to what we are doing, and that it could be strictly for low-performing schools. And as was mentioned earlier, the goal of the whole race to the top issue is to see that students get a better education. And we understand to do that teachers need to be trained better, that we need to be able to collect the data. And I also believe eventually it really does mean an individual learning plan for each student, where the student and the teacher and the parent, because the parent is the first teacher for the student, for the child, sit down together and look at the goals. And this also takes into consideration the learning style of the child, takes into consideration if there are any learning disabilities. There are a host of issues that can be diagnosed very early by kindergarten. And when we look at our young people who are in prison, they can't read. They're dyslexic. They can't read. They couldn't get a job. We know what we need to do. The data is there. So I'm really happy to see that we are tackling this in a bipartisan way, and I certainly hope it has great success.
Great. And let me just once again thank you, Senator Alquist, for the hearing that we'll have in San Jose. It's scheduled for November 9th, and you can check with my office or Senator Alquist's office. We're still working out the location, but that's going to be, I think, a very strong focus, especially in the area that you represent, on turning around, making sure that our students are proficient in critical science and math and meeting the needs of the new technologies. So thank you so much. Senator Liu.
I too want to thank you, Madam Chair, for your work in this area. Just some nuts and bolts talking about this legislation. What is your timeline to get this piece of legislation out? I mean, I heard from them about November or earlier as possible, blah, blah, but what is your intent?
I'm waiting for a response from the pro tem.
Okay.
So let me put it that way. It's in the hands of the pro tem. He and I are going to meet either later today or tomorrow. But as we've heard from the earlier discussion, we've got really a limited window of opportunity in order to act. So I can't say, I mean, I've indicated to the pro tem
as soon as possible.
In fact, I had even suggested, could we begin to move this out as early as next week, because we are going to be back in Sacramento next week for potentially a water vote. There's still some discussion in terms of what amendments or discussion there may want to be, and I'm certainly open to all of that. But by asking for next week, it may be. And I gave the pro tem, I said, look, we've got the end of October, we've got up to mid-November realistically,
right.
First 3 weeks, but this of course, has to get through committee, through appropriations, the Senate floor, which I think we will move. We've got to go through the Assembly and then come back, and then enrollment. So it's stay tuned. Let's just say stay tuned.
I just was curious about that. And also, the state of California we know where the low-performing schools are. We know what districts they're in, by and large. We should know that. We should know who the superintendents are of those school districts. We should also know about which school districts are offering the most innovative and creative opportunities for these kids, or all of our kids, actually. And so I don't see this as kind of I see this as a managerial problem as opposed to being something that really needs in-depth turning the soil, getting to the roots of stuff. So, and it's, I would hope, because in my district, which I absolutely love, the 21st Senate District, because I have some high-performing schools in our public school systems. And it's incredible that what we can learn and even push those high-performing schools, which we're not dealing with, to be even better, more competitive, to meet the international competition of what's going on out there. And it is this, for me, who's been a school classroom teacher for it's been a long time. But we've always had low-performing kids, always, and we've had Title I monies, Title V monies. We've always made these investments. So what is it that we need to do to turn this around? So I just think that this is a huge challenge for all of us. And it was alluded to in terms of poverty and other kinds of circumstances that are beyond the public schools, or is it responsibility? So it's just something that I think needs to be looked at more holistically, and because every kid has an opportunity, has the well-being to be able to learn and be successful. So I think that's an attitude that we all know about, and we want to provide that opportunity here in California. But we just need to identify the barriers and what are the best practices, and how are other states doing it.
Senator Lieu, if I can just comment as well, Arnie Duncan, when he was here in Sacramento, spoke very eloquently on some of the questions that you've raised. And a statistic that just shocks me is that there are, in the nation, 2,000 schools which account for the majority of the dropouts. 2,000 schools, thinking about the number of schools in the nation. Here, you talked about the list. Do we even have a list? Because remember, we're not just talking about low-performing schools. This really is saying we want to look at the chronically low-performing schools. The example I always give, I represent East LA, Garfield High School, and you've probably seen the movie Stand and Deliver. I was horrified when I saw the most recent statistics at Garfield High School, constituents and families that I represent. And these are kids that have every opportunity and every aspiration to do well in school. But 5%, 5% of Latina girls at Garfield High School, these are 11th graders, 12th graders, scored at basic levels of proficiency in mathematics. 5%. That is just, it's morally just not defensible. So, yes, there's poverty, but, I came from, as they said in those days, the other side of the tracks. It's about the opportunity and making sure that at all levels we have the resources, absolutely, the funding. We've got to fight for funding. We're at the bottom of the barrel nationally. And I think collectively we will do that. But it's also about, and I think even just right up there as well, is how we use those resources to make sure there's a fair and equitable distribution of funds. The Williams settlement reinforced that in terms of the distribution, the fair distribution of resources. So, yes, we've always had low performing. Yes, we've always had, but I think at this point the commitment is to say it's just not defensible. And we have an opportunity to dig in, develop the spine that we need, and the collaboration, because really, this really shouldn't be about spine. This should be just about it's the right thing to do. And I think that we can do it. So on that, I know there's a quorum call for senators to go forth. Sergeants, can we ask, have they started session yet?
They've got a quorum call.
But a quorum call is different from starting, because what we can do is go ahead and start calling members of the public if they'd like to come up, and at a certain point, maybe I'll stay, and other members you can choose if you wish to go back to establish the quorum.
Republicans just went into caucus, so you're okay to stay for a while.
All right. There, Senator Weiland is convincing Senator Hollingsworth there. All right. So thank you so very much. We look forward to working with you. And for all of you who participated in these informational hearings, we're very appreciative and thankful. Let's go ahead and start with public comment. If you wish to step forward, please step forward. Does anybody wish to step forward in public comment? Otherwise, all right. Okay, welcome. And if you can go ahead and just state your name for the record, and we'll go ahead and we'll proceed. And just at any moment, if we do begin Senate session, we will go ahead and do a recess and then come back at a later point in time when there's a lull in the floor activity. All right, let's go ahead and let's proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning, Sherry Griffith with the Association of California School Administrators. We are very pleased to provide comment today and appreciate the efforts of the chair and the members to really move the ball forward in many areas that we agree with you we need to continue to improve upon. My comments are specifically to the measure itself, and I just want to bring up a couple of points. In regards to data, we're so pleased that SB 19 was signed. We were supportive of that effort, and we would like to continue to support the effort to include student achievement data in local principal and teacher evaluations. I want you to know that our membership is very supportive of that. We do think that it needs to be done appropriately and responsibly and carefully, and we think that test data should be incorporated with other elements of evaluation, including instructional strategies, classroom management, and school-based site leadership as part of those evaluations. In the area of open enrollment, we do indeed agree that parents must have choice. We would, however, recommend to the committee that in the measure SB1 that you consider perhaps a more defined metric for identifying that. We do think that decile 1, 2, and 3 is somewhat broad. It is always a third of the schools in California. There are 2,300 in decile 1, 2, and 3, and we actually have schools, particularly in decile 3, that are as high as 736 on the API. And as you know, the metric is at 800. What we would recommend is that you look at possibly amendments where you tie the choice piece to the 5%, and that you look at the choice for those schools that you're identifying so that there's a greater focus in that arena. Third, in the struggling schools, and you've heard this said before, we think that it's a little too prescriptive in regards to the 4 cures that the federal government is providing. We completely concur with the Department of Education that we'd like you to look at whatever formula you use for the 5%, that you work directly with those districts so they can assist you in identifying the schools they know are the 5%, and then work with them to identify the appropriate reforms, those here, but also others. And you know, Superintendent Steinhauser spoke to you about what he's doing. We think there are other models that you can include. And then finally, we do believe that there needs to be a structure for the review of any type of Common Core standards. We want to maintain our rigorous standards, but we also want to be able to have a structure to do so at the state level. Thank you.
And let me just say I'm very appreciative of the comments. What I would invite you to do is to work with our staff directly, give us suggested, so we can start looking at this. I mean, of course, it's going to be movement as we go forth, but this is the time to give us as much comment as possible so we can go back and maybe we take some, maybe we don't the other, but we invite the participation, the observations. We want this to be a very strong measure that makes us competitive and to get it right. Thank you. Next witness.
Good morning, Barrett Snyder on behalf of the Franklin McKinley School District in San Jose and also the San Bernardino County Office of Education. Wanted to raise 2 issues that we've noticed in the current draft of the bill, provisions related to the open enrollment section. Mainly one area around staffing. The API rankings for schools are released after many districts have made decisions and locked in contracts about the next year's budget. The provisions of the open enrollment are fairly flexible, and local districts can waive, under the current language, can waive the application time periods and whatnot. That potentially has the effect of creating significant mobility mid-year for districts and will cause, in some districts, a lot of money to flow out of the school mid-year, causing a huge budget problem. So we were hoping to find some language to work with your staff to potentially address that issue. Second, the issue is really, what about poor kids? There's no funding for transportation provided. So if you have families with kids that can't afford to send a student, their child, to a district that's probably a lot further away than, let's say, going over to the next school, because we're talking about districts, how does that student use the choice? How do they get to that other school? that's a significant barrier we see for the poorest families that are attending these low-performing schools. Hoping to find a way to address that. There is Title I dollars that you can use for transportation. It's part of NCLB. It's unclear whether you could use those funds for this purpose, but it's something to explore. And just wanted to say that we agreed with Senator Simitian's comments about getting it right. We're not opposed to the idea of providing choice, but we want to make sure that the language provided really allows choice for all kids, particularly the poorest kids. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Jim Hawley at TechNet. We're about 200 of California's leading technology companies. I'm also here on behalf of Silicon Valley Education Foundation, which serves 260,000 students in Silicon Valley. And I just want to say we, like the other speakers, very supportive of SB 19, very appreciative of what the legislature and the governor worked together to do. A couple of quick things. We see Race to the Top as one of the most important opportunities to move the ball forward on education. We're extremely appreciative of your leadership on this and want to help in every way we can. I think a couple things. We recognize that resources are tight for everyone, including our companies at this point. We're very hopeful that we can all come together and work for a solution that works for everybody. We did want to also bring to your attention the fact that I think you're already aware, which is that the Race to the Top includes STEM as a competitive preference priority. And for our companies in Silicon Valley and throughout the state, it's really important that we get STEM right. We're very interested in working with you to do that and to really give California every possible advantage that we can get in this competitive process for Race to the Top. So we want to make the offer and work with you going forward. And I also want to say we very much subscribe to the point that you mentioned that the educational opportunities we're trying to advance really that advancement needs to be for everybody. We want to make sure that everybody in California has that opportunity. So, again, want to work with you. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you so very much. Next.
So, Madam Chair, members, Mike Ricketts with the County Superintendents of Schools, and just two comments. First, we would echo many of the comments you've already heard. We're supportive of the effort that the chair is making in making California competitive and eligible for Race to the Top funding, specifically related to identifying lowest performing schools. As you've already heard, decile 1 through 3, the decile model in a status-based assessment system is not a good way to identify low-performing schools for purposes of imposing sanctions, because we've seen, if you look at the data over time since we first started doing the Academic Performance Index, we've seen actually very good growth, both in terms of the whole school population, scores increasing. We've also seen a tightening of the distribution so that the differences between the highest performing schools and the lowest performing are significantly less than they were when we first started this in the late 90s. So we've seen real improvement. That doesn't get reflected in the decile model because, as Sherry pointed out, you always have 30% of your schools in the bottom 3 deciles. So we need to look at a different kind of an assessment system. So we would strongly urge the committee to consider really moving towards a growth-based model. We know that that's a part of what you're looking at here, but really use a growth-based model to assess schools in their performance, because you can have a low-performing school that still is ranked in the lower deciles but is growing significantly, while you can have a low-performing or even a higher mid-performing school that's fairly static over time and isn't showing a lot of improvement. So you really need a good growth model to assess where schools are and where you need to focus your efforts, I think. So we really would like to see that emphasized in any legislation. Second area is that this is a race, but we don't think it's a sprint. We think this is a marathon. And the one thing about a marathon is you have to be consistent. You have to have stamina. You have to stick with what you think works. We have things that we've been doing in the state now for some years. District Assistance and Intervention Team model is one that we think is showing real promise. We would hate to see us respond to federal priorities that would cause us now to shift direction, to throw out the things that we've been spending some years working on developing just to be eligible for some funding. So we think sticking with what we know works right now and fitting that in as best we can with an application that will be competitive is really something that's important to keep in mind.
Let me just make a couple of comments, if I will, on that. I don't think it's a marathon. As Senator Alquist indicated from the late 60s, we've been looking at this. We've been in a marathon forever. In my mind, this clearly is. This is a race. This is about urgency, the power of now, and the will and the momentum to make the change. So that's, at least that's the mind frame from where I'm coming from as I approach this issue. On the question of growth, and of course we're moving towards that, and the Solorio measure that was assigned begins to set us up in that sense. But also, and again, from LA Unified, and I'm glad to see the representative here, he can speak in a little bit, but one of the main concerns I've heard from, these are school board president, Monica Garcia and Yoli Flores Aguilar, is to a large extent, okay, great, yes, let's move, let's look at growth, but it may take us 3 decades to finally move. So I understand the question about decile versus growth. I think it's both. But if I am a parent and my child is in the lowest decile, it is more than growth. It really is about where my child is. And so I think that's the focus. We can figure it out. Give us your language. Give us your suggestions. But at least going back to it, I certainly, if I am in that lowest decile school in California, it is a bigger issue than just growth. And if you have any question about that, I urge you, please, meet with the representatives from LA Unified that did something very, I think, courageous and assertive by the school choice resolution that passed overwhelmingly in Los Angeles. So I appreciate the comments, but I do want to be able to interface with you and have you at least go back and reconsider that as well. But give us your thoughts. All right, thank you. Next witness.
Erica Hoffman on behalf of the California School Boards Association. I'm going to bring up 2 issues that really haven't been discussed yet. Just to let you know, we are in agreement with a lot of what has been said by the county superintendents, by the school administrators. I wanted to bring up the lifting of the charter cap issue. I mean, the reality is we've got a huge gap in between what's been approved and what is currently allowed. Lifting the cap may or may not make that big of a difference, but we do appreciate what you had said earlier in your opening statement about ensuring that there is some accountability and transparency for the governance of those charter schools, especially since we are, if we do end up lifting that cap, it's more or less a free rein. So let's make sure that there is that openness and transparency, both in ensuring that the public can participate and does participate, but also is aware of what the charter schools are doing. So we would love to work with your staff further on that issue. The other issue I wanted to bring up just briefly, and it does tie into this Common Core standards, is the issue of the Common Core assessment. One of the tests they are talking about is the use of the NAEP. We just want to kind of lay out some concerns we do have with it in its implementation at the national level. Here in California, we do include almost all of our kids. We include all the special ed kids, the English language learner kids. A number of other states do not. So we're very concerned as how this would be operational at a national level, and we do just kind of want you to keep that in mind. If they are looking at using a national type of test, what is it? What are the loopholes in who gets to take it? And that's kind of a big concern. And also the fact that if you look at where California standards are, NAEP doesn't necessarily fully line up, especially in the 4th and the 8th grade, with what some of our standards are. So that's kind of one thing we need to make sure as we move forward on this Common Core standards and ensuring that California's strong standards stay in place, that these do line up and that we don't kind of get punished on the backside just because we aren't fully aligned with what they want to do because our standards don't match up on a technical basis, shall we say. So I just want to kind of raise that so you do keep that in mind.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to working with you on this. Next.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Edgar Sazueta on behalf of Los Angeles Unified School District. First of all, we just wanted to thank the Senator, the committee, and also the administration, the Department of Ed for your efforts and your leadership on this issue. We wanted to go on record in saying that our Board of Education last month took formal action to support SB 1. And while we understand that this is a process that may evolve and, there may be further changes to the bill, we're definitely supportive of the spirit of where we're going with this. As you know, and as the Senator alluded to, many of these educational reforms are already taking place in Los Angeles at the local level, and we're very anxious to participate in whatever way we can. I heard the representative for the Department of Education state that they're looking for local buy-in, and I know our folks down in LA would be more than anxious to to be involved in that process. So while we do understand and we very much support that we have to do this right and we want to be involved in those discussions, we do see an urgency in this matter, and we're very supportive of this process.
Thank you. And again, we will have the November 5th hearing on restructuring the chronically low-performing schools in Los Angeles, site to be determined, but we will be working with your board members as well. That's November 5th. Thank you much. Next witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff Freitas with the California Federation of Teachers, and thank you for the opportunity for these public comments. We'd first like to say about the compete part of Race to the Top that California needs to do the right thing in progressing further, because what we're doing here is we're applying for an application for one-time money, and the reforms and the changes that we're going to be making are lasting and they're lifetime. And I believe that's what the speaker from CSESA was talking about. This is a marathon. These are changes and reforms that are going to be lasting, at least for hopefully for our lifetime, and we're looking down further. We need to remember what has happened in the past, as well as when we implemented API, and right afterwards AYP came in and everything was changed on its head in the state of California. The second thing is a race to the top when the bottoms dropped out from under us. We're talking about the budget cuts over the last 2 years. $17 billion have been cut from K-12 education. What has happened with that? We've reduced the number of school days. We've reduced staff. We've reduced delaying textbook adoptions, class size reductions, providing additional opportunities for students before, after, and during school. We have given flexibility for adult ed programs. And what does that do? That's providing ESL to those parents of those students that are trying to learn English in the elementary schools. So it's difficult to try to race to the top and do reforms when we're having these huge budget cuts at the same time. And that's part of that needs to be part of the discussion, is how to get back there and how to get these class sizes back down and how to get these number of days back in the schools. The third thing we need to talk about is the charter schools, as the speaker from CSBA talked about, is not only about the cap, but the accountability for charter schools. We need to have high-quality charter schools. If we look at the Stanford study, and I know everyone's kind of talking about that right now, but only 17% of charters are actually achieving better than their peers in the regular public schools. We want high quality, and if we were to talk about the 17% and only kept those 17 that are currently in the state, would be even farther below what the cap is right now. And what Rick Miller said from the CDE about turning around schools, it's those people in the classroom that know how to turn around those schools. And what you have in SB 1 in turning around those schools is you're eliminating those teachers. You're eliminating those principals from implementing what they think is the best thing. We need to look at what is the best thing for turning around these schools, as what we have with the DATE programs right now, as the other part that is in the ESCA currently. We need to make sure that that's in the law, and hopefully that's going to be in the regulations. And the last thing is I want to thank Senator Hancock for bringing up the issue that it is not only the things that happen in the classroom, that happen in the school, that's going to change these reforms. It's going to be happening in the communities. And we need to be providing the lunches, medical, pre-kindergarten education. That's going to turn around this community in this state. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Madam Chair, Steve Henderson, representing the California School Employees Association. Many of our concerns have already been addressed by some of my colleagues speaking earlier, but I just want to touch on 3 specific areas. First of all, we can appreciate the conversation about looking into these reforms. What we are concerned about and what we ask the legislature to do is take a look at these reforms and evaluate whether or not these are the right reforms for California. And certainly we should evaluate that not because we are going to be getting federal grants, which will represent, quite frankly, less than 1% of the total education funding that we provide here in California. We should really look at these and look at them on their merits and really think about whether or not we can sustain the investments, the initial investments that we're going to make with respect to these reforms over the long term. I'd also like to just touch on charter schools. It's already been mentioned before. We currently have about 700 charter schools. We're authorized under state law for almost twice that. it doesn't seem to us that lifting the cap necessarily prevents charter schools from happening. So we don't see the cap as a deterrent to charter schools in California, but certainly we would not want to see that cap lifted without addressing some of the accountability issues that need to be taken place in that charter school arena. And finally, I'd just like to talk about the low-performing schools. Clearly, from what the representatives of the superintendent's office and administration said earlier today, the focus is going to be on low-performing schools. But what I would suggest is, as you're looking at these reforms, you look at the very limited and prescriptive nature that the bill lays out for dealing with these low-performing schools. And it's a concern that it kind of does not address the successes that we may have had over the past 20 years in dealing with these low-performing schools. And so we would suggest that rather than just looking at three very limited and prescriptive areas, you open that up and look at what has worked for us here in California and look toward applying that to help these schools and the issues that they deal with.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And we'll look forward to getting these concrete ideas to us. Next witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Liz Guillen with Public Advocates, and we are partnering in a coalition called Parents and Students for Great Schools that's composed of PICO California, California Acorn, and Californians for Justice, as we try to work through and advocate in developing California's application to Race to the Top. I would just want to make 3 points, and we will be submitting comments as to SB 1. One of the reasons we addressed teachers in the Assembly Committee meeting is because we know that's one of the most important resources for student success. And in California, we're still very much behind when it comes to the equitable distribution of qualified and experienced teachers. We know that ARA used terminology both about effective teaching and highly qualified. So highly qualified is still the law, and we still have a long way to go on ensuring that highly qualified teachers are distributed fairly. But adding effectiveness only adds to the mandate that we have. And we think it's going to take a lot of resources for that and a lot of focus. In terms of turning schools around, we agree with some of the prior comments about the prescriptive options, and we believe that there are examples of a transformation model having worked, and our community partners will be weighing in your hearing in Los Angeles about that. Finally, we really take heart with the LAO's admonition about looking at existing funding. California still has not, and in the governor's recent veto of AB 8, has turned away from the task of overhauling how we fund our schools, whether they are funded adequately and equitably to meet the students with the greatest needs, to fund some of the social needs that have been mentioned in this hearing, and then finally, whether or not they're funded efficiently. All these things were recommended by the Governor's Committee on Ed Excellence, and it's puzzling why the Governor vetoed AB 8. But in his veto, he said it could be done, and so we're hoping that we can see some movement about that. And finally, with regard to bringing districts together and the stakeholder involvement, the districts that are at the table now that supposedly are the most reform-minded hopefully will bring the communities in these discussions. Our outreach to community organizations and partners suggests that there's not a lot of outreach going on from districts to them about what they think should be part of turning around, or even whether they're going to be involved in that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Madam Chair and members, Rand Martin on behalf of the California Charter Schools Association. I actually wasn't going to testify today, but thought I needed to respond to a couple of things that have been raised in the testimony in the public comment period. First, on the cap issue and on accountability, we agree that those are appropriate issues to be considered in the context of SB 1 and other things that may be happening relative to the plan, and we look forward to working with you and your staff on resolving those issues in a way that are helpful to the overall objectives of this. I do want to point out, however, that the nexus created by one of the witnesses relative to conflict of interest and governance issues that are currently housed in AB 572, which is on your floor, we think is a distraction in Race to the Top. We don't think those are appropriate. It's not consistent with the objectives of Race to the Top. We think that there are issues that do need to be resolved. We're not disagreeing there. But the accountability that is talked about throughout the President's and the Secretary's efforts relative to the Race to the Top are accountability on academic achievement and making sure that children have a quality education, making sure that a local business leader is prevented from sitting on a charter school board of directors. We don't think is an appropriate item to discuss in terms of providing a quality education. Would not want to be adding to reasons that might harm the overall plan submitted to the federal government. So we would encourage that issue not being on the table as part of Race to the Top, but certainly on the table relative to other work that the Senate may be doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Last witness.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Chris Walker on behalf of the California Association of Sheet Metal Air Conditioning Contractors, the California Automotive Business Coalition, and the California Industrial and Technology Education Association. The Race to the Top, the general objective of Race to the Top is to reward those states that are engaged in innovative reforms to allow students to better succeed in both college and career. That's the overall objective. And as Madam Chair, as you said earlier today, it's not just about the money, it's about the future face of public education in the state. So as we move forward, I look forward to working with you and your staff and the members of both houses to ensure that we're really addressing the policy issues that have led to the demise of career technical education in the state of California. It would be very difficult for us to say to the taxpayers and to the federal government that we're better preparing kids for success in careers at the same time student access to career technical education is an all-time low and continues to be dissipated in an unabated format. Student access to career technical education is at all-time low in the state of California. It's not getting better. As we prepare an application to the federal government to say we're doing a better job to prepare kids for success in careers, we need to fix that problem. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Okay, we've come to a conclusion of the hearing. Any closing comments from any committee members? Senator Hancock?
I would just like to thank you again for having this, for bringing people together so that we can see where we are, and hope that we can move forward as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Senator Liu? Ditto. All right, bravo. And let me also encourage all members of the committee as well, reach out to your districts, reach out to your certificated, to your classified, to parents, PTAs, representatives. This is going to be a collaborative process. And so I think it's an exciting time. I do want to reiterate that in my belief, this is a race. It is not just about the $4 billion or what share might come to California, as has been articulated. This is about the blueprint for the future. This is about looking at other federal funds as well. But this really is about beginning to say, with an administration that has argued that education is the civil rights issue of our time, that this is an opportunity for us to begin to set a new footprint in the delivery and the opportunities that come with public education. So I look forward to running this race with all of us, and we're doing so on behalf of the 6 million children and their families in California who are looking to us to make sure that we are not only eligible, but we are competitive, we are in that shuttle, and we are skyrocketing to the moon and beyond. So having said that, I'll further consult with Senator Steinberg on how quickly we'll be back, and we will get you the list of other hearings that will be taking place in Orange County, in Los Angeles, and in San Jose. And if you'd like a hearing in your district, let's see if we can accommodate as well. All right, this hearing is now officially concluded. Thank you so very much.